I'm with author Gordon Pettie, who's just written a new book, Israel, Lebanon and Hezbollah. Now, Gordon, what is this book about?
Well, the name's in the title, Israel, Lebanon and Hezbollah. I wrote a book, nearly 2 years ago now, which was on Israel, Gaza and Hamas. And that was just written immediately after the horrendous things that happened when Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, 23. But really, the seeds for this book were the day after that horrendous attack happened, because October the 7th, Hamas went in and attacked the Jewish people in Israel. But on October the 8th, Hezbollah began flying rockets across the border from Lebanon into Israel. And that first day, they sent over a couple of hundred rockets. And really, they continued to do that day after day. I realized that whilst I knew quite a bit, and I think quite a lot of us know quite a bit because of the news about Gaza and about Hamas, I knew very little about Lebanon and about Hezbollah. And so I began to do research, and then out of that research has come the book. And the connection between the three is critical, I think, to us understanding. And I believe that Christians need to have a greater understanding of the history of Lebanon, the story of Hezbollah, and, of course, the connection with Israel.
Who is Hezbollah?
Well, Hezbollah, it's fascinating. I suppose if we're talking about Hezbollah, we really need to go back to 1979. Iran was at that time ruled by the Shah of Persia, but in 1979 he was deposed. He had to flee the country. And triumphantly, after he'd gone, a plane flew in from Paris, and it carried a Shia cleric who'd been in exile in France called Khomeini. And Khomeini was welcomed as a hero and named as the supreme leader of the newly named Islamic Republic of Iran. And that was the title that he retained until his death. And he began training college in a city called Najaf, which is in Iraq. And he encouraged Shia clerics to come from surrounding countries, particularly from Lebanon, to the training college, and he began to teach them. He had a number of key principles, and the key principles were they had to be strict followers of Islamic Sharia law, that it had to be understood that Sharia law interpretation was to be done by the clerics and not by the politicians, and that the clerics would accept that one Shiite cleric would be the overseer of all of Shiite Muslims. And it was accepted that the one was going to be Khomeini himself. And with that as a beginning and teaching them, when they went back into Lebanon, he sent along with them 1,500 Revolutionary Guards to southern Lebanon, to the Bekaa Valley, and that's where they established a training place. And that was the beginning of Hezbollah. It wasn't known as Hezbollah at the time, but it became Hezbollah, and Hezbollah means the party of God.
Wow. So this is a very timely book, I imagine.
Well, I think so, because it's after I wrote the book, then the increase of things that Hezbollah were doing into Lebanon just became greater and greater. And of course, we know that the things that happened, that Israel managed to somehow, it's never been totally proven yet, but somehow they managed to infiltrate the pocket phones and ways of communication that Hezbollah were doing. And they began to assassinate some of the leaders. It's been interesting to follow all that's been going on over the time since the October the 7th, 2023.
Now, Hezbollah is in Lebanon. What was Lebanon like in the past?
Lebanon, to be honest, Paul, I knew very little about Lebanon. I'm fortunate that a member of our team at Revelation TV is from Lebanon, so she's been able to fill in a lot of information for me. But Lebanon used to be known as Little Switzerland, and the capital, Beirut, was known as the Paris of the Middle East. And it had the most upmarket shopping malls and designer boutiques. It really was the place to go to in the 40s and 50s. Today, it's a country of famine and hyperinflation. It's not a good country to live in. But in terms of Lebanon itself, it's a beautiful country. We can go all the way back into the Old Testament. It's mentioned 70 times in the Old Testament. It's called, particularly in our Old Testament, Canaan, and the people are called the Phoenicians. But if you fly into Lebanon, then you cross over the mountains of Lebanon, as they're called, and they have snow on them. And if you're wealthy enough, you can go up there and you can ski. But then you can come 40 miles down to the coast and you're on the coast of the Mediterranean, and you can go swimming. So you could do skiing in the morning and swimming in the afternoon if you had the money to do it. But not many Lebanese people today can afford to do that.
How much control does Hezbollah have on Lebanon?
An enormous amount. There's a interesting quote which I put in my book. Let me just read it to you. In the UK, a place called Chatham House. Chatham House is in London. It's a Grade 1 listed building in St James's, and it's the home of the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And a gentleman called Dr. Lina Khatibib is the director of a Middle East and North African program at Chatham House. And he says, Hezbollah has risen to become the most influential political organization in Lebanon. It enjoys legitimacy within the Lebanon state, but is able to operate without the accountability which is required of a state institution, and without the full responsibility of the Lebanese people. In other words, what he's saying is that they do have enormous control in Lebanon. They're the largest group in the parliament. The army is bigger than the army of Lebanon, but they don't operate as a government. And so they have a lot of control, but that's the question.
Is Hezbollah like a country in a country?
Yes, but without the responsibility of the country. Lebanon has two borders. To the south, it has Israel. To the north and to the east is Syria, which makes it very interesting in view of what's happening in Israel, in Syria today. And then over to the west, of course, is the Mediterranean with its beautiful beaches. 22 miles away, countries like Cyprus, which maybe people who are listening have been on holiday to. But it's the majority of the Hezbollah is to the south, in a place called the Bekaa Valley. And the Bekaa Valley is really known as the breadbasket because it's such good temperature, good weather in order to produce lots of food. And that's where Hezbollah has based itself, in the Bekaa Valley and southern Lebanon. And Hezbollah has been very clever in that it's taken to social media. When you begin to look and to read and to study about Hezbollah, they've got for themselves, for instance, a weekly newspaper called the Al Ahad, which means the pledge. That's been in existence since 1984. They've got a radio station called Al Noir. And then in 1989, they began a TV station. And I'm told that it has a budget, this TV station, of $15 million US. When I think of how little by comparison we have at Revelation TV, I'm quite envious of $15 million budget. But it's made itself into the most preferred media channel in the Palestinian territories. And so what people are being fed through their TV screens is the message of Hezbollah. So it's got a lot of control in the country.
Is Iran a main funder of Hezbollah?
Yes. Yeah, undoubtedly. Iran, I mean, let me just take you back for a moment to think, how big is the army that Hezbollah has? The gentleman who was the leader of them for many, many years, Nasrallah, he boasted that their army was 100,000 fighters. I think that was a bit exaggeration. But if we go back to the Institute for Strategic Studies, they said the army was 20,000 personnel. And if you've got 20,000 personnel, you need all of the people in the back room to go alongside to make it happen. You need all the weapons to it. Just begin to think in terms of the amount of money that must be needed in order to run an army of 20,000 people. And it's not just the army that needs paying, but every time that a person dies who's part of Hezbollah, then Hezbollah continue to pay them something like $250 to the family every month. And if somebody is married, they get $750. The amount of money they get through is enormous. And it's estimated that Iran give them as much as 700 million every year. That's what they have been doing up to now. But when in the USA they began to examine the finances of Hezbollah, they found also a great amount was coming from Latin America. A great amount was involved in drugs and contraband. And so their budget could be well over the billion.
Is there a strong Christian community there in Lebanon?
Yes, there is. It's got a very strong amount. Any writing on Lebanon, you'll find many references to Christian. There's a Christian army, there's a Christian political party, there's Maronite Christians. It's said that there are 18 different religions in Lebanon, from Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, Druze, Christians, Greek Orthodox, and their constitution. I mean, I should say Lebanon, of all of the Arab nations that we're looking at around there, is the only one which has got freedom of religion. And so when people like Christians are being persecuted in countries nearby, like Syria, the place they flee to is to Lebanon. But Lebanon's got a constitution which says that the president must be a Christian, the prime minister must be a Sunni, and the speaker must be a Shia. It must be the most horrendous, trying to work it all through. But the problem is, in the last couple of years, no one could agree who could be the president, because he had to be a Christian and they couldn't agree on who that should be. And so because there wasn't a president, there hasn't been a prime minister and there hasn't been a speaker. And it's only recently that has been resolved. But I think much more important is that Lebanon does have a strong Christian community, and it is a growing community. When we got to the first anniversary of the horrendous Gaza attack of October the 7th, I rang up a friend that I knew, Christian friend, in the Middle East, and he told me he'd been talking with the people around Lebanon, and he said not all of them are responding to the Israel attacks in the way that the BBC and Sky would like to paint the picture. He said discerning Lebanese people are rejoicing at what Israel is doing to the terrorist Hezbollah. The pastors are glad that God is using Israel to root out the spirit of evil that's been brought to the land. And he said to me, we need to be looking not with our physical eyes, but with the spiritual discernment at what is happening. And there are strong Christians, and they're standing firm at this moment of time in Lebanon.
Of course, one of the main problems for Israel is that Hezbollah is right on the doorstep of Israel, isn't it? Just like Hamas is in Gaza.
That's right, literally right there. I devoted a chapter in the book. I interviewed a couple called Gary and Sahar, and they lived in a kibbutz, the kibbutz Elon, and it was literally 2 kilometers. It was set up in the 1930s, I think I'm right in saying. In this kibbutz, it had about 1,500 people in it. It was in, obviously, northern Israel, and they lived there and they worked there. Sahar grew up in the kibbutz. Gary came over from Southampton and settled there, and then he met Sahar and they married and they've got a family there. But I interviewed them and I said, just tell me a little bit about your story. And they described how they had a bomb shelter and how every time that rockets came over, they had to flee. And he said, literally, we have less than 2 minutes in order to get into our bomb shelter before the rockets will arrive there. But on October the 7th, Gary got up first, listened to the news, saw what was happening from Gaza into Israel. And he said, I knew immediately that the same thing was going to happen from Hezbollah into Israel. And he woke his wife. They watched the news. They decided then that day to leave the kibbutz. And he said, if we hadn't have done, the Israeli government anyway ordered us to go. And ever since then, up until now, he's not been able to return to the kibbutz. They've had to rent accommodation elsewhere in Israel. He had a job. He was a fitness instructor in the kibbutz. He's not able to do that anymore. Sahar worked. She was administrator for a school of music that was in the kibbutz, and people came to from literally all over the world. She can't do that. And you just think that's one couple and the effect that it's had. And there are something like 50,000 Jewish people who even today are not able to go back to their homes because of the threat of Hezbollah coming across the border into northern Israel and the rockets that are being flying in on a daily basis.
Do these groups, Hezbollah and Hamas, want to commit genocide and destroy Israel?
Absolutely clear that that's what they want to do. One of the things that I've done in my book is put the manifesto of Hezbollah in it so that people can read it for itself. The manifesto was put out in 1984. It was obviously in Arabic. I've managed to get hold of a good translation of it into English, and I've included it in there. But let me just read to you one portion, because it's just absolutely full of hate and venom for Israel and for the USA. And it says, its manifesto said Israel is America's spearhead to our Islamic world. And it goes on to say, our struggle with Israel stems from an ideological and historical understanding to the effect that the Zionist entity is an aggressor, is existing on land usurped at the cost of the rights of a Muslim people. And so our confrontation with this entity should end only and when it has totally been eliminated from existence. Based on this, we do not admit to nor abide by any ceasefire decision against it, nor do we adhere to any peace treaty with it. That's Hezbollah. And the same is true for Hamas in Gaza. I mean, 1928, the Muslim Brotherhood was begun in Egypt, and they were totally anti-Semitic. They totally went for the destroying of Israel. But they created absolute chaos in Egypt. Egypt banned them. I find it quite interesting that you're looking at a country like Gaza, and Gaza's border is with Egypt. Is Egypt helping at all? No, it isn't, because Egypt knows what Muslim Brotherhood caused in its country, and they know that Hamas is simply a coming out of the Muslim Brotherhood, and therefore they don't want to help them. And so both these groups, along with the Houthis, their whole purpose in life is to destroy. I don't want to get political, but I look at what the politicians are saying in terms of the two-state solution and all the things that they're saying. But if the Palestinians get a state of their own, what are they going to do? Their stated aim, according to the manifesto, is to destroy Israel. So they will never be satisfied until there is no longer a state called Israel.
Do you think that Hezbollah and Hamas will destroy Israel, or is this a spiritual battle and God is on the side of Israel?
I'm absolutely certain that God is on the side of Israel. The Bible describes the Jewish people as the chosen people, the apple of God's eye. One of the quotes that I put in the book is Genesis 17. You know I'm sure, the verses where it says, and I will establish my covenant, this is God, between me and you and your descendants after you in their generation for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your descendants. I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you're a stranger, all the land of Canaan. And I said a little earlier on, Canaan in the Bible is often referred to as Lebanon. But I give you the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And God said to Abraham, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you, throughout their generations. I read those words, Paul, and I'm constantly seeing everlasting. I'm constantly seeing to your generations and to your generations. The Bible talks about an everlasting covenant. That's what God has with the Jewish people. And we know that the Bible prophecy is being fulfilled. 1948, when the Jewish state came into being, was the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And quite clearly, Revelation 21:22, tells us the end story. And the Jewish people are still there, and Jerusalem is still there, and God will fulfill it.
Why did you want to write this book?
I think for a number of reasons. One is that I want people to understand what the Bible is saying. I believe that for many people, that they struggle. We listen to what's happening on the BBC and Sky, and we hear all the political views, but we don't understand what the biblical views are. And I wanted people to try and understand that. I wrote it because I didn't understand a lot about Lebanon. I didn't understand the connection. I find it fascinating. I mean, there was a period of time when Lebanon wasn't called Lebanon, but it was called Greater Syria. And we're seeing at this moment of time in our news what's happening in Syria. We've seen Israel going in to help the Druze, and the Druze we've seen are people who are by and large are supportive of Israel, and so many of them live within Israel. And I think that when we understand our history, then the Bible and what's happening in the world makes so much more sense. It was Karl Barth, wasn't it, who said, you need to take a newspaper and you need to take your Bible, put the two together, he said, and then you'll get God's understanding of what's happening in the world.
Have you got more books brewing at the moment?
Not on the Middle East. Well, I'm going to bring one out on Jerusalem. And I want it to be... Well, I mean, Jerusalem is the land that the Jews have claimed for themselves. It's a land that Christians believe the Lord's going to return to. It's a place that the Muslims want to make into their own. And so you've got the three major religions of the world, all who are seeking and vying for the place called Jerusalem. And we need to try and understand why that is and what the Bible has to say and how it's going to end up in the final times.
What is your prayer for the Middle East at this time?
Oh, I would say my prayer is what the Bible says. Pray for Jerusalem and for the peace of Israel. I mean, I look at what's happening in places like Gaza. My heart goes out for the people and what they're suffering. But there is a spiritual dimension to it. And Paul in Ephesians says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual powers. And my longing is that Christians will rise up, pray for Israel, stand with the Jewish people, and see the hand of God at work and defeat the enemies of darkness. I mean, I listened even last night to the suggestions of the starvation that is going on in Gaza. And if you put into Google countries of the world where starvation is happening at this moment of time, the top 10 countries were listed, and Gaza wasn't amongst them. You've got places like Sudan, you've got places like Somalia, you've got places like the Democratic Republic. We never hear about what's happening and the terrible situations in most countries, but it always centers in about what the accusations, what Israel is doing. And that says to me, it's a spiritual issue as much as it's a physical issue. So we need to be praying, and Christians need to rise up and to stand with Israel.
Where can people find your book, Israel, Lebanon and Hezbollah?
Well, it's published and it's put out by Revelation TV, and so they need to go to a Revelation TV website and they'll find details there. Or they can ring the Revelation office, and on the website it gives the telephone number, and that's how people can get hold of the book.
Oh, Gordon, thank you very much for sharing today.
It's an absolute delight. Paul, you're over there in Israel, and I pray for you, and I pray that God will continue to use you so that you can be a person who can tell what's really happening in the land and the situation over there. So bless you and thank you very much indeed.